Hi, this is Marvin McKenzie. I am the pastor of Bible Baptist Church in Puyallup, Washington. I thought I would start today a small series of episodes that have to do with Baptist history. I've said Roots Matter. I wrote a book a couple of years ago that I entitled Roots Matter, a Baptist's interpretation of church history. Several years ago, I took a course on the history of the world, and the professor of the course explained that historians are like archeologists, and they're interpreters of evidence. That's what they do. They're interpreters of evidence. So what they do is they take accounts of history, as fragmented and as they are, in little pieces of history, and they collate them together. They put them together. They collate them together with other sorts of evidence, and then they create what they believe is a plausible explanation of what might have happened. Nobody really knows. Since no one's alive to tell us what happened in history, nobody really knows what happened. Every history you read, no matter how authoritative that it is, and no matter how much of an expert the historian and the authors might be, every one of them is a guess. Educated guess, but it is a guess. It always is. They take the evidence that they have, the little pieces of documents and fragments that they have, and then they take other pieces of kind of evidence and material that they put together, and they put it all together, and they organize it and arrange it in a way that where they can present to you what they think might have happened. That's the best that they do. And to illustrate this man, this professor, told a story of a former student of his. He said this student was interested in history. When he asked this student, the student was from Korea, and he asked the student why he was interested in history. And here's what this history student from Korea said. He said that he wanted to become a history authority because Korea lacked what would be a strong national history, and his goal was to become a recognized historian and then create a history for Korea, a version of history with a bias in favor of Korea. And every historian writes his version of history, his plausible explanation of what happens from a particular bias. He's got a bias that he's working with. Well, church history, like all history, is subject to the biases of the historian. The historians of church history all have their own biases. And as honestly as we may attempt to interpret historical, archeological, and literary evidence, our work will always be swayed by both our personal biases and the biases of the historians and the works that we study. It's just going to happen that way. It'd be dishonest for us to claim anything else. By the way, it's dishonest for a historian of any subject to claim anything other than he's giving you a plausible explanation of what happened, not an actual account of what happened. No one's alive to tell us what happened in history, and in most cases, especially ancient history. Anyway, so that church historian's work is always going to be swayed by his personal biases and by the biases of the historians and the other works that he studies. So much of his church history has ignored this natural phenomenon, and it has been presented, church history has been presented in dogmatic tones that intend to drown out the voices of those biases other than the one that the writer wishes for us to hear and what writer wishes to present. Catholic historians, for instance, past centuries, clearly attempted to suppress the influence and the memory of any church doctrine other than their own. Most Protestant church historians merely mimicked what they had received from Catholicism. And then Baptist historians, though also very clearly biased, have been dismissed as lacking scholarship or as being radicals, or even worse, as being heretics for presenting a view of church history that favored the Baptists and the Anabaptists as underground champions of the Christian faith, rather than calling Catholicism the root of Christianity. And so Baptists have been said, well, Baptist historians have been said that they're factious, they're radicals, they're heretics because they refuse to accept that Christ built his church, and that church became Roman Catholicism, and Roman Catholicism eventually went through a Reformation period that branched out into all of the Protestant churches, Baptists being one of those Protestant groups. We Baptists would claim something entirely different. We Baptists would claim that Jesus founded his church, and he promised that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And that over the course of time, Satan also built his church, and that became started out as a small kind of established churches, and then that all morphed into what became Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic Church, and all of those kind of things, morphed into all of those things, went through its process till it corrupted and then branched into Protestantism. But all of the time that this was happening, Anabaptists and Baptists existed. And that the gates of hell have never prevailed against the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ through Anabaptist and then Baptist churches. So what I want to do in this episode of this series of short lectures is just spend some time talking about the roots of especially Baptists, Anabaptists and then Anabaptists, and just spend some time on those things. And I hope that they'll be a blessing.